The Interfellowship book group that I'm leading is currently discussing this book, The Inequality in America, The Inequality in America Irreversible by Chuck Collins. And I have to be honest with you, I kind of have mixed reviews about it. I'm just trying to adjust my screen. Hold on a second. Okay, whoops. Sorry about that. There we go. I have to say I've got mixed reviews about it. So Chuck Collins clearly has a lot of credentials. He's an author and a senior scholar at the Institute for Policy Studies in Washington, D.C. He directs a program on inequality and the common good, and he's the co-founder of Wealth for Common Good. So he knows a lot about inequality in the US. In fact, he's pioneered efforts to get investors and business leaders to speak out publicly against corporate practices and economic policies that increase income inequality. He talks in the very beginning of the book about his firsthand experience. He had a job in his 20s where he was working with people that lived in trailer home parks. The tenants wanted to try to purchase the parks themselves as a cooperative. And so he had firsthand knowledge of financial information of hundreds of low-income prospective purchasers. And he could see that by the mid-'80s, there was this decline in wages for the bottom half of income earners. Now, Collins was from a relatively privileged family, and he witnessed the opposite within his family and everything else. He saw the wealth building wealth at the top end of the ladder. So while his family and friends were celebrating their good fortune, those that he worked with were not. So Collins points out in the book the reasons for inequality. I mean, the one that comes up over and over again is the lack of union membership. It's down to about 10%, and there's a lot of stories of how union membership created the middle class in America. But then he also talks about in the 1980s with Reaganomics, the tax laws were changed and more than ever before favored the wealthy. And then over 40 years of that, politics and government have essentially been taken over by the wealthy powerful. So all of these things are pretty well documented and often cited. Well, he goes on to say, well, does inequality really even matter? And it does. It's kind of obvious. He said, first, it makes you sick. So pollution is, people who can afford to live outside of polluted areas do, and so then it never gets taken care of where people can't afford to move away. But he also said that it tears communities apart. You've got riots in the streets because people's lives are so horrible versus people who, in this pandemic, it's hardly even affected them. He said that the inequality has created a lot of social mobility and opportunities that no longer exist like they used to. People are not moving up. We've heard that before. And that the poverty also threatens our democracy. Democracy only thrives when we all think of each other as somewhat equal, that we're in this tight, narrow definition of what society is in the Commonwealth, and we're able to do things like pay taxes for the common good. But instead, when you have such great inequality, it creates a society where it's us versus them, and are they getting too much and are we getting enough kind of thing. Well, in chapter 2, he talks about the barriers to change, and then the book began to get a little more interesting because all of those things that I just cited, I'd heard before. He reminds us of the tale of two populisms, that the folks who haven't done well in this new inequality spread have started reacting and acting politically, and they've gone into two camps. You're either in the Bernie Sanders camp and the far left of one party, where it's the desire to build a strong safety social net and a lot of programs that are offered by the government, similar to maybe the Scandinavian democracies have. And then the other side is Donald Trump and the far right in that party, where it tends to be creating feelings of, well, you're not getting your fair share and blaming someone else and then coming up with America is great again, and we can go back to something that we once maybe never even had. But either way, it's the same people that they're struggling with the gross inequality in our society, trying to find solutions. Well, again, up to this point, I really didn't learn anything new. Those are well-known narratives. And frankly, those issues are worked on by well-funded organizations like Chuck Collins Institute for the Policy Studies. They're working tirelessly to influence legislation and lawmakers to make a difference. And as I'm reading the book, I kind of felt overwhelmed and helpless. What can one guy do in Northeast Wisconsin, right? Well, then finally he came to the end of chapter 2 with something new that made sense to me: cultural change. He talks about changing the stories that hold this inequality in place. That it's more than just the laws and the policies that have been put in place for 40 years. Those policies are put in place because our culture seems to want them. There's a huge, we all know that our society is very split right now. So there's a huge percentage of the population that are okay with the inequality. And so he believes that it's often driven by this myths of deservedness, the reading that I read earlier, that only the rich, it kind of goes back to the theology of the founding of New England, and it's our theological ancestors, the Calvinists, that believed that if you were wealthy, God had clearly favored you, and you would be one of the righteous that was chosen to go to heaven later. It's all part of that mythology of the Protestant work ethic that's been with us for 400 years, is still alive and present in creating what we have today. So I started thinking about my story. What would my story be? I mean, I'm an early riser. I think I work pretty hard. I think I'm pretty smart. And I've taken a lot of risks, like spending money to go to school and putting off other priorities. But that's not the real story of how I'm your minister sitting in front of you on a computer in 21st century America. The real story is the village that raised me. I grew up in working class, working poor parents. We were never hungry, but we sure didn't have anything for extras, and almost everything I had was a hand-me-down. But my parents, they were high school graduates, but never went any further, and really believed that you needed to go to college to open the doors so that you would be more successful in life. And my whole upbringing was focused on that. My parents made a lot of sacrifices to make sure that happened. And by the time I was in junior high, my aunt, my mother's only sister, who was the very first person to go to college, was an 8th grade history teacher. And she came to our house every Sunday for church and then lunch. And then every afternoon, my brother and I had this private tutor. And she would help us with our term papers and all of our assignments that we might needed to ask her help on. And it kind of helped us plan and get our head wrapped around what does school look like and how can you make it easier to get through this, which seemed kind of daunting perhaps. And then school systems. I was lucky enough to live in a small town that up until the 80s had a steel mill and had relative prosperity and had a school that was pretty good. That changed, of course, once they got through the 80s. But when we moved to a city that the public schools weren't so good, my parents sacrificed again to send me to parochial school as well as my brother. And then when I went to college, I went to a good school, but not because I could afford it. This is where the really privileged went to school. And so it was through a lot of low interest loans, which I don't know exist anymore, and a lot of scholarships that I actually got in the door to be able to then try to work hard. So I have a lot of gratitude for the village that raised me. And I want to focus on those kind of stories to help us change the culture, like Chuck Collins talks about. So the title of my sermon today was 50 Shades of Gratitude, kind of giving a humorous nod to a book and a movie that really I have nothing on that topic to say. But it's really, I want to launch 50 stories of gratitude today for 50 days. So starting today on November 29th through Sunday, January 17th, a few days before the inauguration, I'd like us to consider 50 stories, one each day. Now, I'd like you to consider publishing them, telling people, because of course you can't do cultural change if you just keep it to yourself. So put it out on Facebook, social media, if you're into those kinds of things. If that's not your thing, do it more privately. I'm sure you have email groups or emails that you send to people frequently. Send it to them. Or if you're a little more old-fashioned, keep track of it each day, write it down, and at the end of the week, write it on a note and send it, mail it to somebody. And if you don't have anybody to mail it to, let's do some accountability. Send it all to me. I'd like to hear what your stories are, and maybe I'll collect them and we'll have a service about it sometime after January 17th. So I'd like you to start today. Get in the habit of talking about yourself this way. It'll spread. At the very least, it'll help us each grow resilience, which is our theme this year. The isolation of this pandemic is getting to many of us. And keeping gratitude for the gifts in your life, no matter how small, it actually changes our neural pathways. It changes our attitudes, and it helps us resist all the negativity that is just bombarding us all the time. In fact, this is one of the two questions I have today for the congregational breakout sessions. What are you grateful for? For what are you grateful that isn't of your own doing? For what are you grateful that isn't of your own doing? And sometimes, like, it doesn't have to be an elaborate story like the village that raised me. I was thinking about simple examples. If you're on Facebook or Instagram, many people often post nature scenes, sunrises, sunsets. And instead of saying, isn't this just stunning? I would offer, let's add that the Commonwealth helped us get there. It is stunning because someone preserved the land. It isn't a factory. It is stunning because there are laws in place to make sure that the air is not so polluted that you can't even see the sun. Just add those little things to remind us that we are part of a Commonwealth and we are part of a society, and the things we are grateful for just didn't come to you because you're a good person. So those are my two examples of how to do this. And I thought I'd get us started by asking someone from each congregation to share. So I'm going to call on them, and Andy's going to spotlight them and let them tell their story briefly, and then we'll come back to me again. So the first one is from Steve Decker at the Point Fellowship.
So I thought I was reading out of an email, so this is done a little bit last minute, and I have to overcome a little bit of imposter syndrome to do this. So my own story relates with Taekwondo and the achievements that we've been able to accomplish through that. I'm a 6th degree black belt. My wife and I own a Taekwondo school. I'm the founder and the first president of the Wisconsin Taekwondo Association. I was the first level 2 coach in the state of Wisconsin, which is the highest level offered by the U.S. Olympic Committee. I was the first international referee in the state of Wisconsin in over 30 years. International referee is a designation that's 10 years in the making. You have to be a referee for 10 years to be able to apply. I was the first coach to be selected as a U.S. national team coach. I was the U.S. national team coach for the 2017 World Championships. And I coached the first Wisconsin adult black belt medalist in state history. And all of those accomplishments have a team of people behind them. And first and foremost, in order for a coach to be successful, he's got to have athletes. So a lot of my thanks goes to the folks that believed in me enough to trust what I'm telling them while they're fighting other people. Brooke, my wife, huge support system when I got started, with an eye roll and an okay, whatever. And one of the most important factors of my getting the knowledge to be successful came from, his name is Sherman Nelson, and he was a coach who offered his help if anybody wanted it to come and get it. and I have bothered him for 10 years now. So the path that I've taken in Taekwondo has definitely been something that nobody I had connections with in Wisconsin was able to help me with. So I felt like I stepped on a lot of toes to do it, but it all came from surrounding myself with people who I could ask stupid questions to and get smart answers. So yeah, I hope on target with what you were looking for.
Yes, thank you, Steve. I should tell everybody there was someone else, Sam DeRoche was supposed to do it, and she is sick. So I asked Steve about 10 o'clock last night, and he stepped in graciously, so thank you. Just as public service announcement, I've gotten a couple of texts. Apparently, the broadband signal is a little unstable, so if you could shut off your camera right now, except for those of you that are speaking, of course, until you get to the breakout session, that would really help so that we're not using so much broadband. All right, so Paul Arneson from Open Circle. You're muted, Paul.
Am I okay?
There you go.
Am I unmuted?
Yes.
I will share a personal experience of gratitude. I believe I've experienced many more instances of kindness than most. One of those experiences was when my wife discovered she had ovarian cancer when she was 46 years old. A few months after the initial surgery, her cancer came back, and it was there to stay. And my wife needed ongoing home care. At that time, several people made decisions that impacted the rest of my life. One of those was my boss. He, without me requesting it, told me to start working from home using the equivalent of Zoom, and to let him know when I needed to travel. He said he would find someone else to do the travel that previously was about a third of my work. From then on, I continued to work from home and care for my wife until she died 4 years later. My boss cared enough that he allowed me to care for my wife at home and still do my work and keep my job. For his kindness and understanding, I will be forever grateful.
Thank you, Paul. Thank you so much. Now, Karen Studebaker from Door County.
Yeah. Hello.
Hello.
I think I am mostly grateful for amazing love of all kinds. Kind of hard to talk about it without getting teary. First of all, my husband, for 54 wonderful, growing, learning years together. Then children and grandchildren, but beyond that, friends. And the environment that those friends provided, the nurturing they provide. They have helped me grow, and I feel fortunate to say that I think I continue growing even at age 78. I think I have more growing to do emotionally and intellectually. So I'm grateful that I live in America. I'm grateful that I had family that helped me find my skills and hone them. And life is good. Life is very good. I appreciate it. I'm a cancer survivor too, so life is good all the way.
Thank you, Karen. Thank you for your willingness to share this morning. And now we'll go to Lakeshore with Erica Strauss. Yeah, you're muted.
I thought I just unmuted myself. Okay.
It's okay. Go
No.
ahead.
Okay.
You're good.
All
We
right.
can hear you.
Okay. We cannot choose our parents. And so luck of the draw was very lucky for me. Pat and Ernie Strauss had both been through some rough times. My father, the younger son of an itinerant Mennonite minister, enlisted as a medic in World War II, tracking Rommel across North Africa and serving in the third wave of the Normandy invasion. My mother was a young woman in Depression era and then wartime England. She served in the Women's Auxiliary Air Force, dodging bombs to deliver messages via bicycle, and then left as a war bride for the United States, not knowing if she would ever see her family again. Her courage and love will always be an example to me. My parents granted me the freedom from a young age to find my own spiritual path. Though they were both spiritual in their own ways, they didn't go to church. And when I asked questions about God or ultimate meaning, each one declined to tell me what I ought to believe. Those convictions, they taught me, have to be the product of your own life and your own understandings that come from that life. I think they may be the reason, along with Bill, my husband, who kept telling me I was really a Unitarian Universalist, that I finally became one and found a community that holds me up, holds me to a commitment to love and justice, and a community for which I am grateful every single day.
Wonderful. Thank you, Erica. And now our last one is Nathan Knutson from Green Bay.
Good morning. I just wanted to share a moment of gratitude for my parents as well. They are self-admittedly not artsy people. Unfortunately for them, they did have a very artsy kid. And I just wanted to share a moment that they constantly showed me throughout my childhood and into my adulthood of being willing and able to take that moment to watch a documentary about an artist they've never heard or ask questions about a writer they maybe heard referenced somewhere. And those moments really helped me to understand myself. And they modeled to me the ways that you can show your creativity to other people and engage with someone, not necessarily about something you have an interest in, but just showing somebody else that what they believe is important and what they are thinking is important. And so for all of those little moments and for those moments of really education outside of school, that's the moments that I'm really grateful for.
Thank you, Nathan. And thank you, everyone. Very, very powerful stories. Appreciate your willingness to help me out today. As Chuck Collins states, inequality in America is not irreversible, and it begins with cultural change. We're in a position to change the culture by just changing the narrative. And it seems simple, but these messages multiply. So there's 6 of us that just talked and shared, right? And if we sign up to do this for 50 days, 50 stories, that's 300 stories. Now I know there's more than 100 people on, but so if 100 people, all of you decided to do this times 50 stories, it's 5,000 stories going out into just this region. It's our small way of personally making a difference. So in the short term, just think about yourself. It grows your own personal resilience to help adjust your way of thinking. In the long term, with a cultural shift, it can lead to growing our society's resilience by actually helping to lower inequality. And this, my friends, is the sacred work that we as Unitarian Universalists are called to do. Amen.